This is Daniel Ryan, and this is Odessa After Dark. On this episode of Odessa After Dark, we look into the mysterious death of Teresa Wagner, who was found on February 25th, 1992. Kaylee Sims travels to the Globe Theater to talk to the director of their show that will open July 30th, Little Shop of Horrors. We are here at Interstate 20 near Farm Road 866. We're on February 25th, 1992, approximately 5:20. A body was discovered over in this area. The body was found naked with some rings and a tattoo. Police were unable to identify her at the time, but classified her in the Odessa American as a female between the ages of 20 and 30. The first thing they did was check missing persons, and there was no missing person who fit this description. So the first test in this case was to determine who this person was, and so they had her tattoo done by a sketch artist and put it in the newspaper. This did produce a lead determining that the dead person was Teresa Dawn Wagner, who was born May 14th, 1966 in California. She left behind two children, two sisters, and her parents, all of Odessa. Now, an autopsy was performed on Teresa, but it was unable to determine how she had died. Since her body was out here for several weeks, she had suffered decomposure. Now, the person who left her here probably thought that they had got away with something, and because it took so long to discover her here. So even though it was undetermined, foul play was suspected, because why would you bring somebody out here, take their clothes off, and dump their body? So this case, though, because it was not classified as a murder, has been dormant for 20 years. So now we're going to speak to Susan Rogers to determine why this case has seen new light. Hi, this is Daniel Ryan with Odessa After Dark, and we continue on with the story about Teresa Wagner. I'm here with Susan Rogers of Odessa Crime Stoppers. Susan, the first question I have for you is that Teresa died in 92. Mm-hmm. So why the new interest in this case? What happened to... because this wasn't one of the things that was listed on your website until recently. So what spurred the interest?
Well, her son actually got a hold of me through social media on Facebook and had the same question. Wanted to know why his mother's case wasn't featured on our program. And I got to looking, and she wasn't there, and which is a mistake on our part. We got to looking, and we found, though, that the reason that she was not listed in our files is because her death was labeled an unattended death. It was suspicious when I got to looking into it. Investigators do believe there was foul play in it, but it didn't go on the record as a homicide, and that's typically what we have as a missing person or a homicide on our website and on Facebook. But once we found it and knew what was going on with it, we were able to get with her son David and talk with him, able to get it out to the public and stir up some interest in her case as well. Like I said, the investigators all along have thought there was foul play involved, and so that qualifies to go with Crime Stoppers.
Now, one of the things that was interesting when the police first discovered her body out on the 25th, Farm Road 866, was that they didn't know who she was, that she was found naked, except for two pieces of jewelry and a tattoo.
Correct.
And so they had the tattoo, and they put the tattoo in the newspaper on the Odessa American a few days later. And so how was she finally identified?
Well, investigators, when they arrived on the scene out there, of course, the body had some decomposition to it, but they were able to see this tattoo. So they had an artist come out and do an artist rendition of what that tattoo would look like. They got that out into the news media, and one of her siblings actually saw that on television. And the parents and the siblings went to the sheriff's office and contacted them and said that they thought that that might be their sister. Eventually, she was actually positively identified by dental work that she had done. So that's how they came about being able to identify her.
Now, unlike other stories that we've done, say like Jeanette Drezowicki, who was missing, and Mary Kathleen Rodriguez, who was murdered. Teresa was in the community for a long time. Her parents lived here. She had two sisters who lived here. She was going to school. So this is not like the typical case where somebody comes into Odessa and gets murdered and nobody knows what happened. So she was at least in the community on and off for about 10 years.
For quite a while, yes.
And so is it surprising that nobody's ever come forward or ever been charged in this case?
You know, it really kind of is. We talk about this when we do cases with you. And, you know, this was back in 1992. And, of course, she'd have been about 25 years old, running with her friends, hanging with her friends, going to school. She did have a family. She had a couple of young kids at the time. And, you know, it's one of those things, you know, we've talked about it before where I think it happened and people wondered what happened, might have been scared to come forward at the time and talk about it. And because we haven't known anything about it, we haven't been able to put it out to the public to keep that in front of people's minds and in their faces. You know, and one thing that we always talk about is out of sight, out of mind. You know, if you knew something about it at the time and you're not forced to have to think about it or remember it, you tend not to. So I think that it just, you know, it happened and people were concerned about it at the time. And then when there were no leads developed and they couldn't get anywhere with it through law enforcement, it just kind of fell off to the wayside and people went on with their lives.
Well, there was no real media coverage. There was only the coverage, basically, that the body had been found, that she had been identified, and then that was kind of it. And because there was no new leads, the media had nothing really to report.
You know, and you have to put your mind frame back to 1992. You know, we didn't have all the technology that we have today. We certainly didn't have social media and a way to get things out to people. So, you know, once the case makes it to the newspaper that they found the body, and then there might be a small article next that they identified the body, there probably wasn't a lot done, you know, at that point. And I think you've been able to see that with this case. And again, if it's not, you know, if you knew something back in the day or back at that time, you may have been able to put that out of your mind. I do know that there were countless hours of investigation that went into this. I mean, the investigators at the time ran down multiple leads. I know that they did quite a bit of work on that, everything they could until they ran out of leads.
Well, like, I'll use Wendy's case as an example that who was murdered here in Odessa, but the crime wasn't solved. People who watched the show believed that case was solved because, and I guess that's how you just assume with murders that someone was murdered, they solved the case, and so you don't hear about it anymore. Right. And so to get this out in the public, there could be friends of Teresa or classmates of Teresa who haven't thought about this in 23 years and believe this case was solved, and that's not the case.
Right, absolutely.
And so she was going to school at the Avalon Vocational Technical Institute. So there might be somebody who went to school with her who even has a little bit of...
Right. You know, we're asking anybody that had contact with Teresa Wagner in those days, if you hung out with her, knew her friends, knew anything about her personal life, to come forward and talk with us about that. You know, let us get that information to investigators and visit with the investigators. And, you know, time and time again it happens that somebody out there knows that one little thing that we need to put investigators on the right track. And, you know, you can remain anonymous doing that through Crime Stoppers. If you want to talk with investigators, we can hook you up with an investigator to talk to. If you choose not to and you just want to do it anonymously, give us that information. I mean, she's still got family here. Her mother and father are both still alive. Both of her sisters are still in the area. And she does have children. She's got a daughter and a son who are now looking into this. Her son is the reason that we've reopened this. I think one of the most touching things that he has said to me is that that his sister looks a lot like the photographs of his mother, and so he's never heard. There's not any videos, anything with his mother in it, so he's never heard his mother's voice. But he thinks that in his mind, his mother should sound like his sister does because they look a lot alike.
Well, they were like 2 and 4 when she died.
They were very young when she died. The grandparents have raised them. They're very nice young people. I've met David the son, and very polite young man. He's got a lot of questions, and he has a right. She has a right, and the parents have a right to know what happened.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to touch on is that she went missing, or was last seen, as far as we know, on January 20th. That she went out with some friends to a local bar. And there's no reports of her being seen since then.
Correct.
So if anybody had seen her, say January 11th or January 12th, it would put a whole new spin
exactly
on this case.
Yes, she was last seen on January the 10th. She'd gone out with some friends, and back in that day, there wasn't a whole lot to do in Odessa, and people went to nightclubs, and that's just what you did at that age. And she'd been out with some friends, and that's the last sightings that anybody has of her before her body was discovered several weeks later.
And so, at the time, they believed her body was there several weeks. So there, we could assume maybe that January 10th was the last day that she was alive, but we don't know because nobody has been able to extend the timeline.
Right, can't confirm anything.
And that's why we're doing this story, because we need some help to find out what happened to Teresa Dawn Wagner. She was born in California on May 14th, 1966, and so she was almost, she just turned 25 about the time that she died. And we don't know, the other curious thing about this case is we don't know how she died. She wasn't stabbed, she wasn't strangled, and she wasn't shot.
Correct.
But she was only 25 years old, so something had to happen.
Something happened, and that's why it's considered an unattended death. It was suspicious, and it still is suspicious at this time. But based on autopsy reports that came back, there was no trauma to the head, to the throat. There's no stab wounds, like you said, no gunshot, anything like that. So, a 25-year-old doesn't wind up in a field by pump jack and die. I mean, there's something wrong with that picture. Investigators have known that all along, and they are very interested in what went on with that. They would love to solve this case. So we need some information. We need some help from the community, and I know there are still people in our community that were here in 1992 that probably knew her. Avalon was a very popular school back in that day. A lot of people went to that school. There were, the bars that were along 8th Street, which is the places that she liked to go. There were a lot of people there. I mean, there wasn't much to do in Odessa at that for someone of that age. So, anybody that's seen her, we have pictures of her, we have pictures of her tattoo. Anybody that's seen her remembers anything about that, we're really interested in what they may know.
Well, the last point is what really bothers me is that if this was, say, an accidental death, that she was with some people and she died, why remove her clothing?
Well,
and so that really puts a whole new light of suspicious circumstances on this, because why would you do this and then dump her like that?
Right, and that's what made investigators believe that it is suspicious. You hear those stories all the time where people are out and they're partying and they've had too much to drink, or somebody's overdosed or something to that effect, and they're with a bunch of friends, and they'll put them somewhere, where they can be found, because they're scared. I mean, they're young and they're scared and they don't want to know what to do. This is kind of a different situation. I mean, where she was found, you had to cross a cattle guard and you had to go into some private property to be able to do that. She wasn't left where she could easily be found. Things like that, I think, are what pointed to it being suspicious for investigators. And that's no way for anyone to be left. I mean, that she was a mother, she was a daughter, and she's got kids that want to know what happened.
So, okay, if you have any information whatsoever, you can remain anonymous, or you can contact the Ector County Sheriff's Office with anything that you know about Teresa that would help this case. So thank you very much for having us
Thank you. We appreciate you.
Hi, my name is Kaylee Sims, and today we will be talking about anything and everything Little Shop of Horrors at the Globe Theater in Odessa, Texas. John, is this your very first time directing a musical?
My very first time directing a musical.
What can you tell us about the show? What was the most difficult thing you've done, blocking, staging, trying to get everything organized? What was the most difficult thing for you?
I think it was mainly the blocking around the puppets as they're being built, because you're not too sure how big they were going to be at the time of blocking and getting everything in. So I think that was what was the hardest.
Awesome. Can you give us a little bit of a detail or, synopsis of what this show is about?
Yes, Seymour, he's working in a flower shop, and he's, poor. He's living under Mushnik, who owns a shop, so he's just mad at the world, kind of, don't know what to do with himself, and but he goes to a flower place, and there's a unusual plant, and he likes collecting unusual plants, so he takes it home, and then he starts feeding it blood, and that's when it gets kind of crazy.
Out of all the show choices that you could have done, why did you choose Little Shop of Horrors?
Little Shop of Horrors is a big deal with me because that was the very first show that I had ever watched as I was a kid. And that's what drew me into theater. And that was way back in '99.
So you said this is your first time directing a musical. Have you directed any other shows here at the Globe?
Yes, last year I directed Romeo and Juliet.
Being in a historic theater such as the Globe, what were some of the challenges you faced, putting on a musical in a theater that is not really built for a musical?
Well, the stage is a little bit difficult because it's built for Shakespeare. So on some of the things you want to do with the stage, you're not actually able to do. Such as this balcony can only go back so far, and then you're stuck with it. So it's a little weird sometimes, but it can work.
Can you tell us when the show opens and where we can purchase tickets?
Yes, July 30th is our opening night, and July 31st, August 1st, 6th, 7th, and 8th, and it all starts at 7:30.
How much are tickets?
Tickets are $15 with a ticket fee of $1.
Well, thank you for the interview today, and can't wait to see the show. Hopefully we get to see this miraculous Audrey 2 and how this plans out in a musical.